creating a JavaScript module for Synchronet, sort of a tutorial. I had an idea for a new module, and as I started writing it, I thought, hey, it would be a good idea for me just to record my thoughts as I'm doing this, and then other people can follow along. And if they don't already write JavaScript stuff for Synchronet, then this might be a good introduction. So JavaScript is the powerful scripting language for Synchronet. There's Baha, which is the old one that you don't want to really use anymore. Okay, so my idea was a file transfer protocol that emails a file to the person rather than sending it over the terminal protocol like at Telnet or SSH using like X, Y, or Z modem. Instead, just creates an email with an attachment and sends it to them. I think other people have done this, but there isn't an official one, or I didn't create one. I've never used one. I just thought it seemed like a good, easy module. And somewhat inspired by this one. This is called local copy. It's in your exec directory. If you have a recent Synchronet install, localcopy.js. All this transfer protocol does is copy files. So if you're the local sysop and you have some files in your file system and you just want to quickly move them somewhere else rather than having to download them using Z modem, it just copies the file. And kind of on the same premise, if it was going to send you the files via email, it wouldn't actually transfer them at that moment. Instead, it would put them in the mail base as a file attachment. And this gives you some instructions on how to install this. I can also show it installed, like under transfer protocols here, local copy. So there's multiple ways to execute JavaScript in Synchronet. For pretty much any command line, if you put question mark and then the name of the module, it will execute it. It compiles it, interprets it, runs it, and then passes the command line arguments to the script. In this case, there's a big difference between single file transfers and batch transfers, and that'll come into play later. If we're going to send multiple files via email, it's probably not a good idea to send them all in a single email. It's technically possible, but depending on the size of the files, it could easily exceed the capacity of a lot of mail servers. So probably a better idea to send multiple emails for multiple files. And then you can see in this script here that it iterates through the arguments. That's what this argc is, stands for argument count. And argv is this array here that it is iterating through and copying each file. So if multiple files are passed in the command line, then they would all be copied. We kind of need to do the same thing for this other idea. And you'll notice this is not syntax highlighted. Normally you would use some kind of editor. I like to use Notepad when I'm using Windows for JavaScript editing. And in that example, local copy, if you pull it in, it should recognize it automatically as JavaScript and give you syntax highlighting, so all the comments are green there, and then you've got keywords in blue, and some other, I don't know what color that is, green or whatever. Was that red? Can't really tell. The color blindness is kicking in. Anyway, so that's an example. But the script that I wanted to create doesn't exist yet, called email file. I called it, or just came up with that name, emailfile.js. You'd normally put it in your exec directory or your mods directory. If it's something you just want to keep locally as a modification, you want to make sure it doesn't ever get overwritten by something else, then mods is a safe place to put it. The first thing I do when I'm creating a JavaScript module is use strict. And what this does is enforce more modern strict rules around JavaScript syntax, kind of eliminates the possibility of a lot of gotchas. And so it's just a good practice to always have use strict in your code. And that's how you do that. And then, you might want like an introductory comment or something, this module does something. And not all scripts are modules. That's kind of a debate about what exactly a module is, but you can have other kinds of scripts like external mail processors for the mail server. The web server supports JavaScript in all kinds of different ways. And mostly those are not referred to as modules. Okay, so the first thing I want this thing to do, this module, is when somebody goes to download their files, I want it to prompt them for the email address to send it to. And there is a global JavaScript function for Synchronet called prompt. I know that because I use it and I wrote it. But if you wanted to find that out yourself, the place you really want to go is the Synchronet JavaScript object model reference. That's this web page. This is actually current for the previous release, which was version 3.18b. And the global object here has all the methods, and you can see here prompt. And the syntax is you can pass it a optional value, it'll display that, and then prompt for a string on input. It's a very basic, most of these global methods, especially for input and output, are very basic. The idea is that they're not very featureful, but they're prevalent. So they're available usually in other environments like JS exec, which I can talk about another time, but it's a very basic way to, in this example, to prompt for input. So let's say we want prompt for address. Now this is going to return the value that the user types. So we want to store that into a variable. You introduce variables with the var keyword and then call it address. There's comments going on in chat for those that are watching, and eChicken mentioned that Deuce has a more up-to-date or dynamically generated JS object reference. So this one's current for the last release. If you go to this one, this nix.synchro.net/JS object, this is a nightly generated object model reference. So you can see it's actually current as of this date. The version number, it still says is the same, but it actually there's more objects or possibly more properties and methods here than in the official one, which is the last page I was just at. But if you're running, like, say, a nightly or development build, or you're building it yourself from current code and from Git, then you probably want to use the more recent reference, which is that Nix page that I just showed you. All right. So to test this, what I usually do is use the exec sysop command. Over here in this window, I'm logged into the terminal server, and you'll see here there's a few exec commands. The one that has exec and then a question mark, and then you give it a module name, will execute a JavaScript module. And you start these commands with a semicolon in this command shell. Some other command shells might have a different escape character for initiating, but you type exec, and then the module question mark, and then the module name, email file. It'll execute it, and then if you haven't entered your system password lately, it'll prompt for it. All right, so now it's prompting for the address. That's the string I passed over here to prompt, and then whatever I type will go into that variable var, and we're doing a variable address. I named it. It does nothing with it, but the script is working. And if you have a long command line or you don't type anything here, it'll prompt you for the command line. So this is exactly the same way to execute that same script. So I don't have to type it all on that one string there. It'll actually prompt me for the command line if I don't provide it. Okay, so there's our basic prompt for the address. If I want to do something, maybe I want to do a little more, like, I want to give it the default email address as the user's email address, so they don't have to, like, type their email address every time. To begin with, to find the user's email address, I'd go back to the object reference here and go user. This is the current user that's logged in this object, and then properties, and then here you'll find netmail, the external email address for the user. So this is what they type when they created their account initially. And normally it would be like their Gmail or, home email address or whatever, or maybe it's their own BBS address. And I want that to be the default. So I'm going to use that. And I'm not going to use prompt. Instead, I'm going to use console.getStar and then pass user.netmail. And then that's not going to display anything for the prompt. To do that, I would want to use like an output routine. And so you could use something simple like print. There's a global print method, but it automatically appends a carriage turn line feed. And that's not very good for a prompt, where you want the cursor to stop right here and then wait for the user to type something. You don't want a carriage return line feed. So you could use printf, that would work. That's kind of overkill because it supports a bunch of formatting information using those percent specifiers you'll see in some of the code. So I would use one of the console methods. In this case, I'm going to use console.print and then email address. And then the arguments, so you can find that console.print method here as well. So you go to the reference, go down to the console object, or up. Yeah, here it is. Methods. Print is listed here, and you can pass multiple values. It also supports a mode, a set of mode flags. And there's another reference for output routines here. So if you go to the wiki, you go under JavaScript, was it customization, JavaScript, and then output here, object model, and then output. It gives you more of a summary of all the different output methods and their capabilities. And you can see they're all slightly different. An important distinction here is whether or not it automatically appends the new line. Like I talked about earlier, I didn't want to use the print method because print is actually an alias for write line. Yeah, aka print here. So that's instead I want to use console.something, and then in this case I probably want to use color codes, a Control-A code, so that's why I'm going to go for console.print. But you have different capabilities depending on what you want the output routine to parse and expand. I'm passing in the default string. I also want to pass in the reference. Let me go to the reference to this. It takes some other arguments, like with the maximum length of the string. So again, console methods, and then I'm looking for getster. So it starts with the string, optional. The square brackets indicate optional arguments. So the first argument can be the string, which is the default value. If somebody just hits enter, that's what it's going to be. Maximum length, if you don't specify it, defaults to 128. A set of mode flags, and optionally some history. So you could actually have like a history of different things that the user had entered for that prompt previously, and then you can scroll up and down using the arrow keys, like you would like at a normal command prompt. That's what that history does. In this case, I don't think history is very useful. For a maximum length, I'm just going to guess 60 seems like a long email address. And then for mode flags, and they're not really documented here, I don't believe. Let me see here. If we have, so K, they're showing like K none, K upper. These mode flags for keyboard input start with a K underscore. And the official reference is in this sbbs defs.js file. And if you want to find that, you go into exec, and then there's a load subdirectory, which is where load libraries are located. And sbbs defs.js is there. And then you can kind of look for all the mode flags here. So bits in mode for get key and getster. So each one of these constants here, they're actually constants even though it says variable, is a bit, single bit value, and you can OR them together to create a set of mode flags that you're going to alter the behavior of these keyboard input functions. In my case, I want to edit the existing value that I'm passed in, so that's why I'm going to use kEdit. I also probably want to use kAutoDel. I like that one. That means it'll automatically delete what is already there if somebody hits a key. In other words, they don't hit enter, then it'll just delete what's there and they allow them to type a new string. And then maybe kline. Kline is another useful one. It'll show the maximum length of input automatically. So that's a useful one. And the way you specify multiple of these is with the pipe character. That's how you OR things together in JavaScript language, OR values, bitwise OR. So like I said, I want to do kEdit and then say kAutoDel and then kline. And then we want to check if they enter a bogus address, or they just like clear it out, or it's like not a valid address. We want to handle that gracefully. There actually is a function for that. It's called net address abbreviated type. And then you pass the address in, and it returns a constant. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get to this next. So this code right here is actually going to fail to run. We're missing the definition of these constants. It's not built into the language. We need to include that sbbsdefs.js. If we try to run this without that, we're going to get an error, and it's going to email it to me too. Anyway, so reference kedit is not defined. The best way to do that is use a require keyword. This is actually a Synchronet thing, but you say require and then the name of the file, sbbsjs, and then just one of the symbols of interest. In this case, we need kedit. So I'm just going to pass that one. If that symbol is not defined, then it's going to go ahead and load sbbsdefs.js. It's kind of the same as load, except it's conditional. It doesn't always load it. It only loads it if this kedit in this example is not defined. And again, in the object reference in here, you can find require and there it is. So this is probably a little more complete description of its behavior. All right, now we've done that and we try to execute it again. Yeah, now it's prompting for the email address. It defaults to my email address. If the auto-del I showed you is if I just type something, it just automatically deleted what was already there, what was already highlighted. So that's kind of a nice feature. And then the next thing I want to do is check the input, validate it. So if net address type, and then the address does not equal net internet. Now, this net internet is also defined in sbbsdefs.js. It's not. It's in SMB-defs. Okay, so it's actually in a child file that's included. So it would compile fine, but it's actually better practice to go ahead and include this in our code. So even though this would work without this, this is better practice. So I'm going to say net internet here. So just in case in the future that SBBS-defs did not include SMB-defs, then we would still get this net internet defined. It's unlikely to happen. I like to keep things backwards compatible, just in case. All right. If the address they type is bogus, it's not a valid internet email address, we want to display an error message and exit. Typically, I would use like alert for displaying an error message. In this case, there's already a string for invalid netmail address. One way to check that is like to look for something like invalid net. I'm using grep, but any other search tool would work. In the control.dat file. And this is, a file that could be localized or modified by the sysop if they need it. Anyway, so you already see here, invalid netmail address. So there's already a string that does this, and it has a %s argument, which means it's the printf format. And so, I have the option. I can use this string if I like. And the way I would do that would be like console.print, and then since it's a format string, I need to use like format or a printf function. bbs.text is how I actually grab the value at that string, and then the name of this line number or string number is invalid netmail address with that capitalization very specifically. And then pass the address that's no good, so it'll print it, and then we want to exit with a non-zero value to indicate an error, and that way the BBS knows that we didn't actually send the file. We're going to fail and notify the BBS that there was no file transferred. That way the user doesn't get dinged for credits or statistics or anything. Again, this actually won't build the way or it shouldn't build the way it is. The reason is that this invalid netmail address is defined in a file called text.js. So we need to require that. And I actually have that code already written there. So let's try this. Exec, I'm hitting up arrow just to go back in the history of commands I typed, and missing a close parenthesis. So I'm not really like teaching JavaScript here, but of course I make errors as I type. So let me see, what did I miss? What line number was that? Line 12, this line. So 1, 2, 3, open parentheses, 1, 2, close parentheses. So clearly I missed something there. Yeah, the format is what's taking the address. So there. Let's try that again. Okay, so it's prompting for the address. If I put something that's not a valid address, I get the error. If I put nothing, I get the error, but I type nothing, so it's still invalid. So the way to send an email, the proper way would be to put it in the message base, the mail message base. There is a message base class in Synchronet. So again, bringing up this reference and going to the top, you see message base here. And you see when you construct a new message base object, so just while you're accessing a message base, you need an object instantiated. It's an instance of this class. Use this syntax here. And it says where code is a subword, internal code, or mail for the email message base. So we're sending email or networked mail or electronic mail. So we would use that word mail. And since it's a string, we need to put it in quotes. So I copied that. I put mail here. And that constructs the message base. But we also need to open it before we can actually create new messages in it. So I'm going to call messagebase.open. And it can return a Boolean. That means true or false, indicating success or failure. If it returns failure, we don't want to continue on. We know bad things happened. So it's helpful to display details about why it failed. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I use alert often for errors. And that's a global method. So you just type the word alert. And then error opening mail base. And that's all it would say, but you can also put a little more detail in if you like. The message base object has properties, and one of those properties is error, last occurred message base error, and it's a string, nice string there. So messagebase.error. So we could just say error and then insert plus. That's how you add strings together. Concatenate messagebase.error. Oh, eChicken knows this off the top of his head. All right, and then again, we want to exit with a non-zero error value to tell the BBS no files were transferred. A 0 is a successful return value. Anything not 0 is failure. All right, and this may not be the first things we want to do. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head here, writing some what we call emergent code. Looking back at the local copy, we can kind of copy this example a little bit. So it's got a main function which passes the command, the first command only. Interesting. And it's looking for send. I guess we wouldn't do receive. There's no concept of receiving so you can't upload using email. That doesn't make any sense. I guess it's not impossible, but I'm not planning on supporting that. So we probably don't need to send a command. Like we don't need to specify whether it's send or receive. It's just, hey, I'm emailing a file, and then just pass all the file names. And so really we just need a loop like this where we iterate through the files that are passed, and we can pass full paths on the command line. So we just need a loop like that, really. Copy and paste coding. All right. So what we're doing in this loop is we're creating a new variable I for iterator. We want to start at actually index 0. We're not skipping any commands at the beginning of the command line. We're just starting with the first argument. And then I will be the index of every argument. And then argc and argv are global. So we can create another argument, which is just like the argument name. And that way we don't have to keep typing argv I like that. So now argument will always be that. Or we can give it a better name. It's the file name. We'll assume it's the file name for now. If I wanted to support like options like, dash verbose or something, or I don't know, maybe like an option to combine all of the files attachments into a single email rather than separate emails, then I might want to support, options where you do like dash and then the name of the option. For right now, I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to say, okay, every argument to this script is a file name, and we want to send each of those files as a separate email. I'm just going to go as basic as that. So how do we send a file attachment in an email? There's actually multiple ways, and I was thinking about this. I was thinking, okay, we could actually do a MIME attachment where we base64 encode it and then create the right MIME header, and that should work. That's kind of a lot of manual stuff in the script. The Synchronet mail server actually automatically does that. If you specify the file name in the subject of the email and you give it the right message attribute, it'll automatically do the MIME encoding of the file. So that's really, I think, all we need to do. And then going again back to the object model reference, the methods here, there's this function, is it this one? Yeah, save message. This is the one that we're going to do. We're going to add a message to the mail base, and we're going to use this save message method to do it. And we pass it an object, which is the header of the message. Header has multiple header fields. This documentation here describes each field, and some of them are required, actually very few, but the subject and the to are required. A lot of the other stuff is automatically filled in, or it's okay if it's absent or blank. You need a from as well. So in this case, the subject is going to be the file name. And so we need to construct a new header. Okay, var header equals, and then to create a new object, you use curly braces, and then name the property that you're going to create. The first one is subject, and it's going to be the file name. We want a from, which is going to be, let's say, the system operator, I guess. The system operators, like, if you're the sysop, it'd be coming from you, I guess. I think that's just system.operator. And then, again, that's in here. So going up to system object, properties, operator. Yep. Operator name, okay. And then to being the address that we prompted for earlier, and then elaborate the from, I'm getting asked. Oh, okay. The from is the name of who the email is going to be from. So like what's going to go in the from field of the email. This could just be a name like, Bob, or it can be the full email address. There's actually a separate field for the email address if you want to specify that. We might, but if we don't, it's okay. It just needs to be a name. And in this case, going to just pull in whatever the current operator's name is. I'm just kind of beautifying this a little bit, making it clear these are different fields. And then for the to, we need to specify the network type, because we can put mail in the mail base that's destined for other network types like QWK netmail or FIDO netmail, or it can just be a local netmail to someone else that's on the local system. It doesn't necessarily go out on a network at all. So we do need to specify to net, and then the net type, which is again going to be net internet. Going back to the reference to net. Yeah, there we go. To net type and to net address. So this is actually to net type, and then to net address will be the address. So the to field is redundant here. It's repeating the address. So let's go ahead and put the user's name in there, since we do know it, or user's alias. We'll just say user.alias. We could put their real name in there, or whatever, but I'm just going to pull it out of their alias. And then let me think what else. Oh, we need an attribute specifying that it's a file attachment. So looking down here to attr, attribute bit field. Boy, that's kind of vague. It's not a very good reference. So I know that those come out of that SMB defs file that we needed earlier, and we don't already have open. So I'm going to open that file. Load SMB defs. Being asked, does it honor netmail forwarding? So it wouldn't in this case because we're sending it directly to a mail recipient. So it's the default netmail address is going to be whatever they put for their user account for forwarding inbound netmail or local mail. But in this case, we're totally skipping their local user account. We're just going directly to an internet email address. We don't care what email address it is. So there's really no forwarding involved in this case. All right, message. I think it's actually an auxiliary. Yeah, it's an auxiliary attribute. It's not even in the regular attribute. It's an auxiliary attribute. Message file attach. And it's kind of an old school one. It's not a MIME attachment. It's saying that the file is actually separate from the mail base, and we're referencing it in the subject of the message. And that's how the mail server knows to pick up that file and MIME encode it and send it automatically. Okay, and of course that's how you end the object, but we still need augs attr. I'll double check that. Yeah, augs attr, auxiliary attributes. And then the value was that message file attach. We're already including SMB-defs.h. The single quotes versus double quotes doesn't matter. In JavaScript, either way is fine. If we wanted them to be able to, like the recipient to be able to reply to the mail for some reason, then we could put in like the sysops email address, but I don't think it's important. We'll test it without it. All right. And then all we need to do, I think, is messagebase.save. So we pass the header, and I think that's it. Let's see. We can specify client information, body text, so we can put a little message, here's your file, and then a recipient list if we wanted to send to multiple recipients. In this case, we have a single recipient, so we don't need that list. But like, let's say we wanted to send this one file to 10 people, then we could have an array here of recipients, and each recipient would have a separate to and to net type and to net address field. The client information, this object here, it's really for security information that's included in the header. So it would tell us the host name and IP address and other information about the connection, the current client connection that initiated this message. So we'll go without it for now. All right, so the body text, we could just type, here's your file. And then again, we have a function that returns success or failure, a Boolean. So true is good, false is bad. If it fails, we definitely want to tell the user this, and again, return a non-zero value. Okay, so again, alert, error, messagebase.error, saving message. I usually put a little more thought into my error messages, but I'll do that later. Okay, and so each file is going to be a separate message, and then we're going to close the message base. If you don't do that, then it would actually close automatically when this object goes out of scope, but it's good practice to go ahead and close it when you're done needing it. And then exit 0 will tell this script to make sure it returns with a 0 value to the caller, so the BBS knows, hey, we successfully sent this file. It's not actually, the mail server hasn't sent it yet, but we're just trusting that that's going to happen, the receiver's going to receive it, and everything's good. All right, so let's try it. Oh, I didn't pass any file names to it. Notice that? Okay, so it'll actually do nothing. It'll open the mail base and then do nothing. So it just returns 0. So what we probably want to do is detect that condition and say, if argc is less than 1, then display an alert, no file names given, and then exit. An alert automatically does like colorization and puts a new line at the end. So You don't need to do that. And same thing. See, no file names given right here. Ignore all these other alerts I'm getting. So it's just a nice quick way to display an error message. But now we do want to give it a file name. Let's say. And we can actually give it any file. It doesn't have to actually be a file in the file base. Oh, good point. So yeah, eChicken mentioned that this check should actually happen before we prompt. So we can tell that way up here early on that the script was used wrong and don't need to bother prompting. I'm just assuming there's a file there called test.zip. Let's see. All right, we got an error. Message base about save is not a function. Yes, that's right. It's called save message. What else would we be saving? So did you catch that while I was typing it? All right, let's try it again. Oh, it didn't queued it. All right, so it just happened, right? There's silent success. We can check the mail base with the semicolon mail command. It's probably gonna be that last one. Oh, look, there's an email. What was that error? All right, well, I think I've gotten down into the weeds. The script works in that I think the JavaScript syntax is all good. I think the details of how to send a file attachment I need to work out without an audience. But appreciate you watching me get this far. And I think the remaining details are actually kind of minor minutia with regards to how to do this method of file attachment. Yeah, anyway, the script, I think, actually, I envisioned it was pretty simple. This does look pretty simple. There was a comment about doing base 64 encoding. The mail server would do that automatically. So the idea is it's actually going to read the file that's been enqueued. Oh, I think I know the issue. The issue is the path is assumed to be from the sender. Yeah, if you do this method of attachment, you should have this directory, which is a user number, and then the file, and that didn't exist. Yeah, assuming that a local user sent the email, and that would normally be like, if it was user number 1, that would then copy the file that was uploaded, or actually uploads it directly into this out.out directory. So data file, and it'd be 0001.out. That was what would occur if I went to like email and then send a file attachment, and I uploaded a file, then that's the directory it would go into. But anyway, this is the beginnings, I guess, of this email file script. Keep an eye on the Git repo, and you'll see what the final looks like. I don't expect it to be a whole lot bigger than this. And yeah, I want to get back a little more on the cosmetics here. So like you'll notice this prompt here is not colorized. Let's run it again just for fun here. So you see it's, just whatever the default color was already is what color that is. So you would insert color codes. The normal way to do that is with Control-A characters. A Control-A is an ASCII 1. So you just do like \1 and then say high intensity, and then like \1 yellow. This Y for yellow. Actually, my habit is \X01 like this. And the reason is that some Control-A codes are numbers. Well, so like let's say you want to do Control-A 4, then \14 would be interpreted incorrectly. That'd be 14. Instead, you want Control-A followed by a 4. So \X01 and then a 4 would do like a background blue or something. Let me see. Yeah, it's background blue. So like 3, I don't know, whatever. That's purple or something. Okay, brown. Anyway, so that's Control-A codes. If I used console.write, I was showing you those functions before. That's a little bit lower level. It does not interpret the Control-A codes. So instead, it's actually going to send some Control-A, some little happy faces to the console. So if you're trying to do console output and you're seeing these little dark happy faces, then that's telling you, oh, I'm using the wrong console output routine. Because we're doing the K line input, it's automatically going to make it that whatever the line color combination is, and that's configured in your control attr.config file. String input inverse text. So it says it's white, high intensity with a background of blue, and then the E is means it bright if it can do it, if it can do a bright background. So if you have ice colors or a Petsky terminal, then you get a bright blue background. While on the subject of doing JavaScript and debugging, eval is handy. This is another sysop command. So eval and then a JavaScript value. It tells you the type and so you can give more elaborate things if you like. Let it prompt you, and then you can say something like user.security.level. Yeah. And you can type many little programs there. Or I equals 0, I less than 10. And then the result is normally the last executed expression or evaluated expression. In that case, it was the last thing in this loop. All right, I think that's good enough. I can debug this troubles without being recorded. All right, there were just a couple of minor issues with the script, really. The sending path, the subject of the old style attachment where we use this message file attachment auxiliary attribute, only the file name portion of the path is used, and it's assumed to be in this user.out directory. And so in order to have the mail server know which directory to look in, we need to set the from extension, that's the user number that we're sending from, and then actually copy the file to that directory here. So that's what I'm doing. I'm formatting it, and then this is the user number 0 padded to 4 digits, and that's the directory where the mail server is going to look for the file that we're sending. I think that's about it. I made the from user the user that's logged in, so that's user.alias here. If we wanted to make this maybe a little bit more configurable, like let's say we want to actually make this string here configurable, okay, where it says here's your file. That's actually really easy to use to do using a library called modops. And how we use that is, let's say you say var options equals load, and then modops.js, and then the name of the module that you're trying to load from. So typically just like the base file name, so email file in this case. But it could be anything as long as it doesn't conflict with another module that's using the modops.ini file. That's kind of a collect all place for options for modules, and modops.ini is in your control directory. So if we load this and there is no email file, then options would be null. So we're going to make that default to an empty object. If there is an email file section in modops.ini, then this would return an object with a property for each key in that section. Now we can use options dot something, and that would reflect that key name in the ini file in the email file section. So in this case, let's say we want to override this string. Well, we'll look for options.message, and if it doesn't exist, then we'll default to here is your file. So then how we would use that would be you'd open your modops.ini, and then you can create a new section, call it email file, and then you'd say message equals, and then the string. So let's say, your file, bro. And now when the user receives their email, instead of saying, here is your file, it's going to say your file, bro. So that's an example of, and this sysop, this could be translated to another language, or, whatever. But if they wanted to get really fancy, like maybe, I don't know, inserting control characters, multiple lines, that kind of thing, you can use a colon, and then this becomes a string literal, and then you can do things like insert carriage turn line feed from your sysop. So in theory, that's going to do your file, bro, and then new line, and then from your sysop. So let's test that and see. All right, email file. And the way I have this configured, by the way, I kind of skipped that step earlier, is I added it under transfer protocols, created a new entry here called email file. I set the access requirements just to syshop while I'm testing this, so just myself. And then I only added a download command line and a batch download command line, no upload command, because it doesn't really make sense in this case. And then it's %f for the single file name, or %s for the list of files separated by space, which each become their separate argument going to a JavaScript module. So that's it as far as installing this. We could also make an install option for this script. It would look similar to what I showed earlier for local copy. It has an install option here, and then if you pass it install rather than send or receive, then it would use this config library to automatically create that entry for a new transfer protocol driver. And it knows how it's saying the sysop only can do local file copies. That makes perfect sense. You probably wouldn't want to change that. For the email feature here, you probably would want to open that up to any user. Anyway, and then of course it prompts for the email address. It sent it. Now I'm going to look at my email and see if it, actually I can look at it right here. Oh, there you go. Your file, bro, from your sysop. So see how it has a carriage turn line feed because I used the \r\n. You can only accomplish that if you use the colon separator here instead of equals between the key name and the value. It's kind of a Synchronet specific .ini file feature. I think another good idea for this would be like maximum file size. So perhaps you want to put a limit on files so you're not sending gigabytes via email. That's unlikely to work. So you might want to impose a maximum file size in the script. And that can be done with a configuration option similar to what I just showed with the message. You could do that with an option from the modops.ini or a command line option. You could have a command line parsing in this loop and have it recognize like -max equals and then a number to impose like a max file size. All right, I hope you enjoyed this creation of a new JavaScript module for Synchronet. Let's see what you guys can create. Oh, look, the BBS crashed.